hopefully you can hear me as well.
Hello, everybody. I'm Derek Arden, and welcome to Monday Night Live. Tonight, I'm delighted to invite back Professor Paul McGee. Paul is an old friend of mine, and I saw Paul on LinkedIn about 2 weeks ago when he was saying it's quite stressful to have your book republished. And I reached out to Paul and I said, Paul, I think you should come on Monday Night Live podcast because that will help you sell the book all over the world. And Paul fell for my sales pitch, and here he is. Paul, tell us about the SUMO philosophy. I love the front of the book, the straight talking guide to creating an enjoyable and brilliant life. I think you've got 13 books.
We lost the SUMO for the for the 20th anniversary edition was referring to. They wanted to go for a very much in your face SUMO, shouldn't move on. But so there I was in 2002 in bonny Glasgow, and I'm doing a coaching and counselling skills course, and I'm talking about all the kind of stuff, share this and get their perspective and blah, 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 and how does that make you feel? All that kind of stuff. And some straight talking Glaswegian, I won't do the accent, says, well, if all else fails, you can tell him to SUMO. And it was like, everyone looks at him and he was like, shut up, move on. And it was a phrase that I just started to weave in. It was almost like someone gave me a seed of an idea. I planted it, I've watered it, pruned it, and it's kind of grown into a rather large garden. And so it became the umbrella term to describe, I guess, a set of, I don't know if it was Godfrey who talked about a set of individuals, we need to become a team. I had a lot of individual ideas, but SUMO became the umbrella term to bring them all together, if you like, and develop the brand. So I would in some ways say, Derek, I stumbled across this rather than, I developed it from scratch. And that's how I find some things are in life with me. I keep open-minded, keep meeting people. I know the general direction I want to go in, but at times I use a compass rather than a set of goals. For me, it is how I tend to do life, really. And so stumbling has been a big part of my, well, you might define it as a successful career.
This original book was hugely successful, wasn't it? And you've published 13 more since. SUMO for kids, SUMO for...
Yeah, there's lots of different. Well, I'd done 4 books before SUMO, and in fact, one of the people who published one of my books is someone who you have, well, I think you know well, and have had probably on your show, and that is Andy Gilbert and Go Mad Thinking. So he actually published one of my books, 59 Minutes to a Calmer Life, back in 2001, and then I had this idea, why don't we do a book? It was rejected by 13 publishers. Capstone, who are part of Wiley, so part of a big publisher, but they themselves, Capstone, pretty small. And if I was to carry on with the footballing theme, and where I do say, and not everyone agrees with this philosophy, I do think luck plays some part in your success in life. I do think that can happen. And so Andy had said to me for my book, 59 Minutes to a Calmer Life, be good to get some endorsements. And I ended up, how it happened, I can't even quite remember. I ended up getting Paul Merson, former Arsenal hero, who was then playing for Aston Villa. And I approached him because I knew he'd had all those kind of struggles. And I kind of sent him the manuscript via the football club. And he actually ended up endorsing, maybe one of the few books he's ever endorsed. Didn't even ask me for anything, bless him. He endorsed 59 Minutes to a Calmer Life. Fast forward a few years, I'm pitching this book to Capstone after 13 rejections. And the guy who's the editor who makes the decisions was a big Aston Villa fan, and Paul Merson was his hero. Never told this story ever in my life, by the way. And I remember him meeting me, and I said, so what was one of the reasons why you met me? He said, anyone who's got my hero, Paul Merson, to endorse a book, he had to be worth meeting. So, yeah, bit of luck, bit of networking, perseverance, and throw it into the mix, and, it's done all right.
And you've been doing coaching for a long time, and you've coached some pretty high profile people. I know some of them you can't mention, but you've worked with a number of football teams, haven't you? Premier League teams.
Yeah, I mean, the first Premier League football team I worked with was many years ago, even before SUMO, was Man United. But with United, I didn't do anything with the players. I just did some stuff on with the staff. Um, but then again, as a result of SUMO, back in 2009, 2010, someone who worked for the police read SUMO, loved it, and said, "My brother would love this book." Well, her brother happened to be head of player care and support at Manchester City. He became a big avid SUMO fan, brought me in, and I was kind of working on a monthly retainer for 5 years at City, and then on an ad hoc basis, and I still do a little bit from time to time now. And yeah, it opened a door for me doing lots of work at City, and that became with the players. And it wasn't always because they had problems. Like, for instance, someone you may have heard of, Shay Given, who's still sort of like in the media now. He him and his wife at the time had got a charity about raising money for Macmillan Cancer. And so I supported him on the kind of like coming up with his speeches, coaching him on that kind of thing as well. You know, there was someone like a guy called Ben Mee who went and played for Burnley for years. Now they went to Brentford. But again, there wasn't like there's a phrase I sometimes use: you don't have to be ill to get better. You can always improve. And so, yes, there were some players and some younger players who had some big issues in their lives. And some of the times I got involved not just with the players and the staff, but with their families. But there were people like Ben, people like Shay, people like Micah Richards, who it wasn't life was really problematic, but they were just looking for give me the edge on how I can continue to improve, whether that be related to football or, in Shay's case, related to stuff he was doing off the pitch.
Mm. And you've been involved with one or two psychologists as well, haven't you? Don't you threaten a psychologist because you're sort of in their arena in a way?
Yeah, it's interesting. I so I didn't know this until after the event, but there was the Leicester City sports psychologist who worked with Ranieri and the players in their championship, or when they won the title in 2016. He was subsequently, I still don't understand the reason for this. The following season, they got rid of him. And he was then speaking at a conference and he went, "I can't believe it. I've met you." He said, "I actually am a big fan of SUMO and have read your book and everything." And I went on and I've done something more recently with Everton. But again, the sports psychologist there who worked at the time with Sean Dyche, so now he'll move to Forest. What was very refreshing about him, a guy called Simon Clarkson, was Simon welcomed me in. But you're right, I think some sports psychologists can feel very threatened by my presence. And I was due to do something at Liverpool, and one of the ex-City members of staff was at Liverpool, wanted to bring me in, and I think it didn't happen because politics comes into play in a lot of these things.
Pep Guardiola is probably one of the greatest football managers ever. Did you come across him when you were at City?
I did. I mean, by then I was only doing ad hoc work, but in 2018, so he joined in 2016, I was visiting the training ground, and one of my other books, How to Have a Great Life, had just come out, and I literally had a rucksack full of books, was walking around doing stuff with giving some out to staff and one thing and another. And Pep walked into the canteen with Mikel Arteta, and Pep said, "Is there a copy for me?" And I kind of went, "Pep, you've got a great life." And he went, "That's what you think." And he wanted it. And then Mikel said, "Well, I presume I get a copy as well." And so, but my contact with them, I'm not going to give you any bull here, was incredibly brief. In fact, with any of the managers, Mancini was manager when I started, then was Pellegrini. The guy who I got most involved in at a managerial level was the one who was managing the under 21s, and that was Patrick Vieira. And for a couple of years, Patrick and I became incredibly close.
Now, tell me, one of the biggest issues with football teams or any team is bringing the very young people on. I mean, Arsenal have got a 16-year-old at the moment in the first 11 squad, and he's having coaching. He hasn't even done his GCSEs. How did you help any of that sort of liaison between the 32-year-old, big swinging, I know everything, and the young 16-year-olds?
Yeah, well, with Patrick, and some of the players would have been a little bit older than 16, but certainly 17 or 18. The reason why I was kind of got more involved with Patrick was because he wanted someone who could support the players, and it was more, I wouldn't have called myself a sports psychologist. I had a multiple range of hats that I wore, and sometimes you're almost like a bit of a dad, a father figure. Sometimes I had to challenge them, and because I wasn't a member of staff, and also what they learnt was if you tell Paul McGee anything, he keeps it confidential unless I've got permission. And so, yeah, there's a lot of different needs that people have, but which has much to do with what's going on off the pitch as what's going on the pitch. But if I was to draw a lesson from Pep, from Mikel Arteta, and from Patrick Vieira, and I know I'm using three male examples there, but one of the things about all three of them is despite all the success they'd had in their careers on the pitch and now in their managerial roles, they were all still hungry to learn and learn from anybody. It wasn't like, well, you're a World Cup winner, so I can learn from you. But Patrick and I developed particularly a strong relationship. And we just developed that rapport, which I know you always talk about as being important. But perhaps also more importantly, we developed a trust. And it was more of a holistic approach that I took. So I talked to him about his wife, his kids, and yeah, it was a great sort of opportunity to work with him, especially. And he actually moved to New York at that stage to work with New York City, who were part of the City Football Group.
He's manager of Nice now, isn't he? I
Uh,
think.
that's right. Yeah. Is it? Well, actually, I think he might have even moved on. I can't keep up with him. Obviously, he had some time at Palace, and then yeah, and then moved abroad. I think he might actually be in Italy now, but I could have that wrong. But he was at Nice. Yeah, very impressed. I don't want to be too football related because I know not everyone's into football, but I think there are lessons to learn. And again, and I bigged up Shelley when she was on one of my other sort of sessions. But you know, um, Shelley and all the people who are on this call today, the fact that you are is an indication of still wanting to learn, still be open minded, still be curious. And I think that's such an important quality to have.
Yeah, this whole group, and it's almost a club or a mastermind group or whatever you want to call it, Paul, that support me are all lifelong learners. We all want to learn. We all want to pass on
100%. 100%.
to other people. Let's talk about stress for a minute, because one of the pages in your book is change your t-shirt,
Yeah.
and it talks about, are you a victim
Yeah.
or what? Can you just talk about that a bit, because a lot of people think they're victims at the moment, I believe.
They do. And I always stress there are genuine victims in life. And I want to make that totally clear. But I think the thing that can happen is I think the media, and I have this phrase, be careful of consuming too much CNN, constant negative news. And I
Mm.
do genuinely believe for our own mental and emotional health, we need to think about what I call your mental diet. And I think what can happen is because for all kinds of reasons, we can feast if we're not careful on so much negative news. I think it can almost like via osmosis get into our subconscious that, life's hard, life's difficult, it's not getting any better. Isn't it terrible? Who's to blame? And if you're not careful, you end up. I mean, I normally have one. I put one to hand here. It's almost like the media metaphorically dish out the victim t shirt. And now, what I would say, first of all, is to use to use a phrase that was, again, we're not getting political, but there was a phrase that was used in 2016 called "take back control," and I think sometimes we as humans need to acknowledge there are things out of our control. But if we just act as a victim and go, My life will be less stressful when everything externally improves. And if everything externally doesn't improve, then I'm just going to be totally stressed all of the time. But I think the media can give the narrative that, well, that's how it is. And I'm just saying, don't perceive yourself as a victim. And it is almost like take a bit of control and think about what you can influence and how you can improve the quality of your life. And there are so many opportunities to do that, even from prioritizing your sleep, getting out in nature, being organized, planning. The importance of connection with other people is hugely important. But what I would say, though, Derek, is we talk a lot, and I do a lot around dealing with change. The majority of my companies that hire me will say we're going through a lot of change. But I think what I notice in life even more now is this other C word, and that's complexity. Life is getting more and more complex. When my mum and dad probably bought a washing machine in the early 60s before I was born, they had a choice of two. Now there's a choice of 202, and you're doing research on which magazine and online for the 4 months before you buy one. In the past, if I wanted to change channel, I got up off the flipping sofa and pushed a button. And it's like even with remote controls, I'd say 90% of what's on my remote control I don't even use or know how to operate it. In hotels, I used to go into a hotel and I would put a switch on and the light comes on and I would close my curtains. And now I've got flipping technology to operate it all. And I'm getting a bit confused by it all. And if I wanted to park my car, I've got to download an app and one thing like, can I not put some money in? And I do actually think, and I don't think it could be a generational thing, I appreciate, but life is more complex and the speed of change is greater than it's ever been in human history. So that can contribute to our stress, along with telling people they're victims and they're powerless and who can we blame?
Paul, you're going to schools. Let's switch from
Yep.
football to schools
Yep.
to. So, what do you tell the school children now? Because all the ones
Well,
I see are walking along with their phones. They're on Facebook. Their heads are down. And in fact, we had Mike Foley on about 6 months ago, who's the head of the Wessex Academy Trust, and these phones are not allowed to be used in the school, or they
sure.
confiscate them.
Yeah.
Which sounded great. They seem to have a good negotiation there with the student committee.
Sure. So what I guess inspired my when actually the copy you've got of Sumo, the original copy that came out in 2005, I put something at the back of it that actually talked about I'd like to try and get Sumo into schools, and it was a very long journey. But what I've mainly done, Derek, is I'm not the guy that does a lot of stuff with the kids. I've had people who've done that for me over the years. But what I've also found is what has probably worked even more effectively in the main is we get alongside the teachers, we do stuff with the teachers, we support them on their journey. So I have this phrase, again, not a unique one to me, I stumbled across it somewhere. Resilience in the classroom starts in the staff room. But
Mm.
ideas that are relevant for the staff become relevant for the kids as well. And then this book came out, launched October 2020, the middle of a global pandemic. So it's yes with three S's. And it's called the subtitle is the Sumo Secrets to Being a Positive, Confident Teenager. However, what I would say is if I was redoing the book, I'd play around with the subtitle because positive confident is great, but teenager, if you've got a 15-year-old in your world, it's not for them. It's more the pre-teens, it's more the 9 to 12-year-olds. And the other thing, which again, because what I want to do is not just talk about me, but think, what are the lessons I learned here? I signed a contract to write this book in 2019. The book came out in 2020. And then I said to the publisher, well, if you're going to do a book for kids, it needs to have illustrations. They went, that's a great idea. We don't normally do books for kids, but yeah, you're right. I said, can you put me in touch with an illustrator? They said, we don't have one. And not only that, they said, you need to find your own. And we haven't got a budget for an illustrator. So if you want an illustrator, you're going to have to pay for them. Well, again, I could have rushed out for my victim t-shirt and gone, that's not fair. But it's like, Paul, take ownership, take responsibility. I worked with a woman I'd worked with before. She did an absolutely
Wow.
phenomenal job. The color, the illustrations, she just knocks it out of the park. However, what getting kids to read books when they're maybe 13 or 14, I think is a bit of a challenge. But when they're 9 or 10 or 11, and maybe some parents who've read it go, actually, this helped me deal with my child because I read it as well, or I've read it with them. And so that's kind of become that my main sort of focus is using the book and supporting parents and staff with their children to use some of my ideas and some of my principles. And I've done, you know, well, I say it's not really, well, I say it's gone internationally. We've worked a lot in the UK, and we've also got some fans in Australia and Spain as well, where sumo has like taken root. And children, you know, love the simplicity of the ideas. One of them, just as an aside, which you as an Arsenal fan won't be having any of this, but hippo time is okay. What do hippos do in mud? They have to have a wallow sometimes. Sometimes in life you get a setback. But what I'm trying to help kids do, but also adults, is understand, look, to sometimes feel mad, bad, or sad is okay. You know, it's not you've got a mental health problem, get a prescription, get a diagnosis. It's actually that life is sometimes up and down, and you might need some hippo time. The thing is, though, always read the small print. Hippo time's okay, small print, but it's temporary. It's a detour, it's not a destination. And what I think can happen in life sometimes for people, and it can happen for children, is they get too stuck in the mud, and then they get people passing them a yellow t-shirt, and it can perpetuate the problem.
Children seem to be getting labels these days, which worries me, Paul. You know, you've got Asperger's, you've got autism, you know, and excuses like that. When I was brought up, there were no labels at all, and I worry about those labels become self-fulfilling prophecies.
I think there is that. I think there is also, I was listening to a podcast recently with a leading expert on autism. And I do think the reason why there's been such a surge in it is partly because one of the profile and more people are being viewed as on the spectrum. But I think what's important, my brother was diagnosed with ADHD aged 56. Now, the thing is, there's complexity around this labeling because for some people it's genuine and having that label actually is helpful to explain something. But given that, you know, being autistic, having ADHD, being neurodiverse in some way, shouldn't be therefore seen as, well, that's your cross to bear, and that defines you completely. You know, it was like, okay, so how do we use it almost as a bit of a superpower? So, I mean, there's lots of children who are not diagnosed with dyslexia, but they've ended up realizing they've got dyslexia. But there's also that challenge that with head teachers talk to me about this is that some people want their children to have a label. And this sounds really controversial. I know you feel you're recording it as well. So no names to be mentioned, but I was speaking to the husband of a doctor whose main role in life is to diagnose people with ADHD and whether they have it or they don't. And there are many, I want to stress this, many genuine cases.
Of
But there
course.
are other cases where she wants to turn around to the parents and say, your son or daughter hasn't got the ADHD. They're having a bad parenting experience. You know,
Yeah,
it's bad parents. And again, got a label, I've got an excuse. No, sometimes a label is a label, but it's when we use it as an excuse and as a get out of jail card, that's not so good. And also, going back to head teachers saying to me, look, Paul, some parents know that they're entitled to carer support and various other financial benefits if they can get their son or daughter, you know, a diagnosis of something. Now, again, what's really important as I'm talking about this is to say those are some examples, but I'm not in any way trying to say that's the majority of the cases. It's probably only a minority, but it's out there, and that's why I think some people can be skeptical. What I think we need to realize is, yeah, have some skepticism, but don't dismiss it entirely because there's a lot of genuine cases there.
Paul, last time you were on, you explained how you got your professorship, which I'm so proud of for you.
Thank
Go
you.
on, tell us again.
Well, it was very, I mean, if as a kid, I dreamed of maybe would I ever work with a football team, and I did. Would I dream of being on stage and speaking in front of lots of people, and I did. Did I ever dream of becoming a professor? Was it even 1% on my radar? No, it wasn't. But it was a client who contacted me and just said, look, your work, I'm a big fan of your work. I have a role within the University of Chester, and you're in the Cheshire area where you were brought up. And she just said, look, you've done a lot of books where you've taken academic ideas but made them really accessible for the general population. And I want to put you forward to receive this title of visiting professor. And that's what happened. So I was awarded that title in 2019. Sometimes I use it, sometimes I don't, and sometimes maybe perhaps because I'm not always comfortable with it, I kind of go, I'm probably the least academic professor you've ever met. But my brother, who actually is a professor, said he would describe me as what he calls an outward facing academic. So loads of academics write for other academics and peer reviewed papers, etc., etc. He said, you are outward facing. In other words, some of those ideas from academia, you project out there and do in fun, quirky, simple, relatable ways so the general population actually tap into the academic stuff but don't realize they've done that because of how I present it. So he calls me an outward facing academic. I'm just plain Paul. But anyway, if you want to give me a label, that's the label.
Plain Paul McGee. Paul, we're nearly out of time. One last tip for people watching this on YouTube or listening to this on the podcast for 2026. We're bombarded by information, complexity, as you say. What would your tip be for people to handle life better?
Number one, I would say carry on doing what you're doing because the fact is they're in good places and they're part of your groups. That says a lot about them. I would also say that whatever your age, if we're not careful, our routines can become ruts and we can have a love affair with our comfort zones. And even on just simple things in life, I go to a cafe, I always order the same drink. It's either an Americano, decaffeinated, or it's a sparkling water. And I literally was thinking, man alive, you're on autopilot here, mate. And maybe there's some other things on the menu you've never explored before. Last week, I had a protein booster, vanilla protein powder, oat milk, something else, and spinach, and it was delicious. And I think the thing that can happen is what I would say is don't get set in your ways. Make sure you're seizing your days, which is incredibly cheesy, but be prepared to try something different, try something new. Because I think as we get older and older, we become creatures of habit. But maybe we're feasting off a limited menu, and there's a few more options on that menu than we might realise. And so that'd be my tip. Keep being prepared to try new things. You might be surprised at what you discover.
Fantastic, Paul. Paul, you're a great speaker. How do people get in touch with you if they want you to speak at a conference or at their schools?
If you think about just if you go anywhere and use the phrase the sumo guy, you will come across me. I'm the sumo guy on LinkedIn, I think maybe on Facebook or Paul McGee. But again, my website is thesumoguy.com. Instagram, the sumo guy, and TikTok. I've now got 40 odd thousand followers on TikTok. Not bad for a 61-year-old. And that is also at the sumo guy.
Fantastic, Paul. Can I ask members of Monday Night Live to give Paul the vote of thanks in the normal Monday Night Live way? That was fantastic, Paul. Thanks so much.
Appreciate that. Great questions.
And will you stay on and answer a few more questions for us?
I'd be delighted.
Thank you. I'm just going to stop the recording.